gonna jump right into it. This is gonna be a two-part series. The first part is support employment as a whole, just in general, to get an idea of that, and then the second part is allies with families specifically, so you can kind of see our outcomes, demographic, all that kind of stuff. Um, we'll just jump right into it. The example I always use of why supported employment is important, specifically for the U.S. economy, is I use the U.S. military because to me it makes a lot of sense. And the reason that I do that is when I was in high school, I remember when any branch of the military used to come and recruit to our high schools and stuff, or even in college, when we used to always make the joke that any branch of the military, they basically will just take warm bodies. They want anybody to work do the military. You know, that was kind of the running joke or whatever. But in reality, um, obviously, you can't join the military if you can't pass the physical evaluation. And also, they don't accept candidates with an IQ of 83 or less. And so, surprisingly, 10% of the entire US population fits into the category of have an IQ of 83 or less. And then another 10% of the entire population couldn't pass the physical evaluation required to join any branch of the military. And so that's in total 20% of the entire US population. 1 in 5 people wouldn't be able to do it. And so that's kind of the way that and then so I'm not saying that we're discriminating against people with disabilities in the military. I'm just giving that as an example, saying that's kind of the way that our system is in place as far as looking for employees. That's what mentality and the idea that employers seem to have, and that's the way that our system is run. Is that we don't employ um, the 20% of the population, this 20% of the population. So the way the system works now is we're just saying, all right, these people, 20% of these people of our population can't work. We'll give them just enough resources to get by. And we'll dive into a little bit more of what the consequences of that are. Um, we focus at Allies with Families specifically on individuals with developmental disabilities, at least at this time right now where we're at. That's our focus and that's our target. So, um, and this is the reason why right here, as you can see on this on the left here, from this survey from 2015, 33.7% of individuals with disabilities are employed. That means 77% of individuals with disabilities are not employed, which is an insane number. I mean, that's adults too. You know, adults, 77% of disabled adults are not working, are unemployed. That's crazy to me. And of the 33% of adults that are working, only 18% of that population are adults with intellectual disabilities. So that's such a small number. And when you break that down even further to adults who are supported by a state intellectual or developmental disability agency, so that are in like a day program or a residential living facility or something like that, only 14.8%, so 15% of those individuals are employed. So 15% of the 18% of the 33%, and that's kind of confusing, but what we're getting at is that people with disabilities aren't employed, and that's a problem. But people with intellectual disabilities are even less employed, and on a minuscule amount, individuals in a state-run agency are even less employed. And so there's a real problem with the disability employment issue is a whole thing of in itself. And when you break it down to intellectually disabled individuals, then it's a um, whole nother issue we've got to tackle. So that's why we focus on individuals with intellectual disabilities. But obviously, we want to help the disability population as a whole, and that includes injured veterans. So, what options? Why aren't these people working? What options do they have? Well, when you turn 18, you can go to in Utah. You can go to post-secondary education. Um, so they call it. What do they call it? Transition school, where they learn transition skills, work skills, all these kinds of things. It's not a terrible system, but after age 22, these individuals age out and they're run through the school system. But once they're 22, they're out of the system. Um, Another option is possibly sheltered work environments, where individuals with disabilities are supervised and structured in a structured workplace setting, and they can be paid sub minimum wage. So these are designed to gain work experience to eventually lead to a job opportunity. There's day programs or residential living facilities, so these like DSPD funded programs, or like we said, work in the community, which is what we support, and that's where and so I'm not saying that any of these things, and there's obviously other little options, like every person's going to be different, but these are the major ones. And I'm not saying that any of them are terrible. Like, we've come a long ways and they're all not bad things. I'm just saying that supported employment and work is a viable and a really effective option. And I'll dive into how it's been effective and who it's been effective for. So the biggest thing that I hear all the time is sheltered work versus community work. So sheltered workshop, like we said, is being in an environment where you're supervised by like a staff who's working off of state funding or federal funding. It's basically a program where these individuals are designed to learn work skills that will lead to an actual job. The problem with a lot of sheltered work is a lot of these individuals who end up in a sheltered workshop who are being paid some minimum wage don't end up actually getting a community job, even though that's what it's designed for. The providers who provide the opportunity for these individuals to be in a sheltered workshop and the companies who employ them both have incentives to keep them in the sheltered workshop, right? The provider to make more money and the company to pay their employees less money because they're paying them less than minimum wage, obviously. So some of the other problems with sheltered work from the bullet points there is that since they've been implemented, supported employment and sheltered work were implemented around the same time, and then that was in the 80s, and in the 80s to now, people who work in sheltered workshops are making 40% less than they did when they started, and that's basically just due to inflation, right? The payments are basically the same for the most part, but they just don't adjust for inflation. Where individuals who earn wages with supported employment, their wages have increased 31% in the same time period. And that's same thing, just with inflation, right? Like my mom and dad who worked in the 80s, my older brothers and sisters, whoever, who worked in the 80s are probably making about 31% more than they did because of inflation, right? Which is fair. So what that is saying is that sheltered work, what we're trying to get across with that is sheltered work isn't paying a fair wage. They don't even adjust for inflation, right? Which doesn't seem right at all. Supported employees, and I'll share some of the specific, the specific examples, but and reports and surveys and things. But supported employees reported higher self-esteem when working in an integrated setting, so working in the community and having a job outside of sheltered work. Employers reported cost benefits experienced from hiring supported employees. Supported employment is lower cost on taxpayers, and in some cases there's actually been a return on the taxpayers for carrying out supported employment. So Utah specifically, these are the DSPD, the Division of Services for People with Disabilities, and the Department of Human Services numbers for 2017. I'm going to focus primarily down here on the bottom three charts, starting with that far left chart. Individuals who receive DSPD services, Division of Services for People with Disability services, 20% of those individuals had a job in the community. You can see on that bottom left chart, 20% of these individuals receiving these supports had a job in the community. That middle chart on the bottom shows that about 25% of individuals in this service receiving these state-funded, federally funded services, about 25% of them have employment as a goal in a service plan, meaning that their case manager or their support coordinator, whoever, helped them establish a plan that has employment as a goal, as an outcome. The problem with that is that 50%, as you can see on the far right chart, said that they would like a paid job in the community. So something's getting lost in translation where 50% of DSPD clients are saying, we want to get a job. 25% of them are actually getting it put into a plan, and only 20% of them are getting a job ultimately, are actually having a positive outcome with their goal. So we in the work people working with DSPD or for DSPD are not listening to our clients. Our clients are saying we want jobs. Half of them are saying we want to get a job, and only a quarter of them are actually getting put in their plan, and then only 1 in 5 of them are actually having that outcome that they want. So there's a problem in this with what we're doing. Personally, that's what I believe, and that's what I think these charts. So why work in the community? Let's talk about Bill. Bill is an individual with a disability. He's not employed and receiving $750 a month in SSI, Social Security. So Bill gets a full-time job making $12 an hour. So that's $1,920 a month, paying $211.20 in taxes, meaning that he's making $1,708.80 per month. Now, because Bill is working, eventually Bill will have the ability to get off of Social Security, and he's going to lose his benefits, probably his Medicaid. So that's obviously not what this is one of the things that scares people. They're going to lose their benefits. But Bill will actually be making $1,000 more per month working, and the state and federal government will be taking $211.20 per month instead of paying out $750. So that's a $961.20 turnaround just from a single individual getting off benefits. So I always share that, and everybody says that's not going to happen. I understand that we're not saying that everybody's going to be Bill. We're not saying that every single individual we're working with that does support employment is going to get off benefits and never have to, is going to be able to get their own insurance, and they're never going to have to use Medicaid and blah, blah, blah. That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying that's the ideal situation. That's what supported employment is designed for. But we're not saying that's going to happen with every client. We're not even going to say that's going to happen with the majority of clients. What we are saying is that work can at least be a supplement for these individuals. So maybe Bill only works for $8 an hour and he's only working 6 hours a week. He's still going to be getting his SSI, but he's going to make more money because he's working, right? He's going to be making more than $750. We can do exact math if you want. You can get a hold of me and we can show you the examples. But what we're saying is that work should at the very least be a supplement, right? We can balance that where these individuals are getting the benefits that they need and are working and are making more money and are having positive outcomes from being in the community doing typical things that typical people do, which is work. And so I think that's why I don't spend that much time talking about why work and why community-based activities benefit the specific clients, the individuals we're working with, because I think it's obvious, right? There's been countless studies, and people know that if you're in the community, it's more beneficial than being in a day program, or it's more beneficial than being in a setting with other people with disabilities. If you're in a typical setting, I keep using air quotes and you can't see that, but a typical setting for typical people, that's going to be way more beneficial for the individual. So I don't focus on that individual because it's obvious to me that that's true, and there's studies that prove that that's true, so there's no need to continue harping on it, even though I'm doing that right now. So that's why I focus on things like working with businesses and with the taxpayer. So let's go back to the taxpayer here. So this is a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo. If you just look at the bottom in the bold, you can see that in this particular study done in Virginia, that for every dollar spent on getting and keeping individuals employed through supported employment, taxpayers received $1.17 back in the form of taxes paid, reduced governmental subsidies, and decreases in alternative program costs. So you're actually making 17 cents on the dollar for running this program, which is still benefiting people too, right? So that's why I think it's been so effective, and that's why we continue to fund it and see more going into it. So I at Allies with Families, we coined the phrases economic development and social development. I think currently the way that majority of providers carry out supported employment is in the social development model. Like I said, these aren't real terms, these are just things we coined, but we personally take an economic approach. We call it, like I said, economic development. This developed by taking different models from fidelity programs like the IPS model, the individual placement and support model, and mainstream supported employment innovators like Mark Golden Associates, Denise Bissonnette, Griffin Hamilton Associates, different places like that. And we've taken their ideas, like things like customized employment, things from obviously support employment as a whole, and different the way that different voc rehab offices throughout the country carry it out, and different offices even throughout the state carry it out. We just tried to take little pieces and create a model that is effective, not just for the individual, which is social development, but for the taxpayer and the business and the individual. So we're taking a threefold approach. So we want to change the way that employers look at hiring and retaining employees. So diving into economic development a little bit more. When we work with a business, we, like I said, implement this customized Griffin Hammis kind of approach, where we want to find ways that our clients can save the employer money, where the client can make the employer money, where the client can expand the employer's customer base, where our client can provide a natural or a competitive edge to that employer, and how our client could provide a natural extension of what the employer is already doing. We also talk about things like targeting a specific market demographic, and I'll dive into that a little bit more as well. So central to this economic development model is what's called the Return on Disability Index. The Return on Disability Index was developed by an individual named Rich Donovan, and Rich Donovan has cerebral palsy. He's an individual with a disability himself, which I think is important because he understands how disability can affect business owners and how it can affect employers. So he developed this return on disability large cap exchange trade note, this ETN, which is an index of about 100 publicly traded blue chip companies in the US, and they choose the 100 companies of this index depending on how they call it, if they do disability well, right? So basically these are companies that hire and retain a large amount of individuals with disabilities, or they use disability in some type of a marketing campaign, or they have different programs set up to forward disability. It could be a million different things, but a lot of it is in regards to hiring and retaining employees with disabilities. So this index was created to prove just what we were saying, that it makes fiscal sense to hire and retain individuals with disabilities, or at least to incorporate disability into your business in some way, right? So at Allies with Families, what we do that I think all providers should do, and all companies, like all support employment programs and companies should do, is utilize the return on disability model and this economic development model to assist businesses in the communities that we serve in to learn how they can experience growth through disability. So how does return on disability do in the marketplace? How does this index perform? Well, since December 2011, you can see how it's compared to this fund, which is a Standard & Poor's 500 fund. It's S&P 500 fund. It's the return on disability in that 6-year period outperformed this S&P 500 index. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the S&P 500, I'm not a financial expert, but I'll give you kind of my quick summary. The S&P 500 is just a collection of 500 of the top performing US-based companies, and it just gives you an idea of how the market is doing as a whole. And you can see during the 6-year growth period for the market in general that the return on disability index outperformed this index. So it just gives you an idea that there's some type of connection of hiring and retaining individuals with disabilities, or just implementing disability in general in your business, and market performance and in profitability. We'll dive into how these companies experience growth through disability. The first thing is that hiring individuals with disabilities solves problems like high employee turnover. It creates an outlet for workplace innovation and accommodation and creates a path of least resistance for consumers to obtain a company's products or services. The thing that Rich Donovan says that I love so much, I say it all the time, is that products and services designed by and for people with disabilities improve customer experience for all. The second thing, and I'm going to dive into each of these a little bit more. So the second thing is, combined with friends and family, the disability marketplace is about 53% of the entire global population. So this is the second biggest marketplace in the entire world, and that 53% of the entire population controls about $8 trillion. I don't even say that word enough, trillion, which is insane. $8 trillion in annual disposable income. So imagine as a business owner, a job developer coming into your business and saying, we're going to show you how to create innovations within your business that are going to create new products and make your products, your current products or services, more accessible to your customers. And we're going to show you how to target a specific market demographic that touches half of your customer base. That means that half of your customer base is going to draw an emotional connection to your business, and that's going to drive reoccurring revenue. And not only that, but half of your customer base, you're not only targeting individuals with disabilities, but you're designing products for the broader market, right? So you can see from our chart here on the left, bottom left corner there, that 53% of the entire population either has a disability or has an emotional connection to someone with a disability, friends or family. 47% of the broader market is going to benefit because you're designing a product for somebody with a disability. I'll dive into that a little bit more. And the last thing is that there's the work. All of our clients qualify for the work opportunity tax credit, and I've worked for providers before, and we never use that as an incentive for hiring. I think you combine innovation and accommodation, high employee turnover rates, with individuals with disabilities more likely to stay long term, tapping into half of your customer base, and a tax credit that can get you up to $9,600 per employee per year. There's no reason that an employer shouldn't hire somebody with a disability. So we talk about that emotional connection. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. The example that I like to use was one that was used by Fifth Quadrant Analytics. They found that a typical YouTube advertisement from a major company will see about 60,000 views in the first 2 weeks of that advertisement. If you just simply add a disability component with the same budget and in the same time frame, it goes up to about 400,000 views. So simply by adding disability, people are going to view your ad more. Like, it's really straightforward. And that draws on that emotional connection with people. Like I said, if half of the people who are viewing that advertisement have an emotional connection to it, they're more likely to watch it again or share it with somebody else or whatever, right? So you can leverage disability in your marketing or in your advertising, or just by simply making a hire. We're saying that if you come into a business, you see that they've hired somebody with a disability, or you've used that in marketing, saying, hey, we've hired and retained an individual with a disability, that's going to draw an emotional connection, and that this 53% of the population is more likely to not only use your product or service, but continue using it, right? Drawing reoccurring revenue simply by making a hire, which is crazy to me that simply making one hire can influence consumers so much. So, like I said, as far as innovation is concerned, it's estimated that nearly half of Google's mainstream innovations have their roots in disability. And we'll show you a quick clip from Google that dives into that a little more.
At the sprawling Google campus in Mountain View, California, the practice of hiring people with disabilities goes hand in hand with the hammocks. Take YouTube, Google's acquisition. About 100 hours of video is uploaded on YouTube every minute. Ken Hammerstein's sole mission? to close caption as much of it as possible using technology he developed. And oh yeah, Ken, or Caption Jedi as he's affectionately called, is deaf. That's his interpreter on the right.
We support up to 10 different languages.
It's obvious why Ken needs captions. But guess what he discovered? Most people who use them can hear just fine.
They're hearing, but there are many reasons. Maybe that's their second language, and it's difficult for them to understand, but if they read it, then they get the story. Maybe in the situation where they can't use sound. Think of maybe you're in a bar with the 10 different screens, or in an airport, or on a train, or a very crowded place where you kind of want the privacy of your own program. Or maybe you're at home where you don't want to wake up the person next to you and you can watch television.
In other words, what's good for the disabled tends to be good for everyone else too. And there's no denying Google is a front runner.
Isn't that cute?
From the self-driving Google car to Google Glass.
Take a picture.
Eyewear that acts like a hands-free smartphone. Imagine if you were in a wheelchair, what that would mean for you.
I gained a little bit of that confidence I had before the accident back.
It's not just about taking existing products and making them accessible, but rather creating completely new things to make the world around us accessible. So
Eve Anderson runs a team set up to make sure all Google products meet the inclusion test. Sure, it's the right thing to do. It gave this young woman some of her independence back, but it also happens to be a really smart business move. A 1-2 punch that creates products for a market the size of China and all the rest.
we all have some kind of impairment at some time. Maybe we're driving and so we can't put our eyes on the screen, or we're cooking and our hands are filthy and we don't want to touch our phone. And so making things that work without relying on all of our senses and all of our capabilities at all times is really helpful for the population.
And so I've been really excited to share these findings, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen these. These are from Disability:IN and Accenture for 2018, and these are just how disability has impacted different businesses. And we'll just dive into them. So what they found is the way that they did this study is they had 90 companies, 45 that, like I said, quote unquote, did disability well, 45 companies that had implemented disability into their either market or hired and retained individuals with disability. They had something running with disability, and then 45 who didn't. They found that the companies that had implemented disability into their business saw 28% higher revenue, saw 2 times higher net income, and 30% higher profit margin. So that's a side-by-side comparison, basically just proving that there's some connection with disability and performance. So bringing it back to the taxpayer, they found also that if just 1% of unemployed persons with disabilities joined the U.S. labor force, that the GDP could get a boost of up to $25 billion, which is crazy. Just 1%. And this next slide is going to dive into a little bit more specifically a specific business and a franchise owner in Toronto, Canada, and how he found effective practice from hiring and retaining individuals with disabilities.
We have one individual who's baking in one of our stores, one of our busiest stores, and she's profoundly deaf. And her productivity rate is 18.4% higher than the person she replaced, and that person had been working that job for 9 years.
Tanya Walsh also takes an obvious pride in raising the bar. She has autism and a spotless work ethic that has earned her 2 promotions in 7 years.
Actually worked really hard doing everything. That's how hard working I am. Even all my other coworkers at Tim Hortons say to me, you work so hard, Tanya.
And then there's Priya Premchuk. She has an intellectual delay but has no problem keeping up with dirty tables. A bit shy, she finds it easier doing her job than talking about it.
What do you like about it?
Tough questions, huh?
Yeah.
What's not so tough to figure out? All three are loyal, productive employees, and the effect is contagious. Not only do Mark's disabled workers tend to stick around, so do his others. In an industry where the turnover rate alone can sink you, Mark is sailing.
It can cost me up to $4,000 to replace a frontline worker in a Tim Hortons. Now, if my turnover rate is 40% and my colleague down the street is 75, and we're both doing just as good a job, I'm making more money.
How much of this is about charity for you?
0. I have 4